The kettle clicks off, but I don't move. The house is quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that makes you forget you were allowed to speak. This is what control disguised as care sounds like. Not shouting, not anger, just the slow erasing of who you are. Have you ever thought safety meant staying small, or love meant giving up your voice? Stay with me. You'll see how silence becomes a cage. And if this already feels familiar, right, I'm still here, because the quietest prisons don't need locks, only obedience. I was 23 when I met Charles. I remember sitting in that cafe near the university, stirring cold coffee and pretending I wasn't waiting for someone to notice me. My mother had called that morning, one of those calls where she didn't really say anything, just sighed a lot and asked if I was eating enough. My father hadn't called in 6 months. He never did unless he needed something. I'd grown up in a house where love felt conditional, where silence was louder than shouting, where I learned early that if I stayed small and quiet, maybe I'd be safe. Maybe I'd be enough. Charles walked in wearing a navy sweater and glasses that made him look serious, older, steady. He ordered without hesitation, knew exactly what he wanted, didn't fumble with his wallet. I watched him from the corner table and I thought, that's what certainty looks like. When he asked if the seat across from me was taken, I said no. And when he smiled, really smiled, like I mattered, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Relief. We married 10 months later. Everyone said it was fast, but it didn't feel fast to me. It felt like finally arriving somewhere after being lost for so long. Charles had a job in finance, a clean apartment, and a way of looking at me that made me feel seen. Not judged, just seen. The morning after our wedding, he sat me down at the kitchen table with a notepad and a cup of tea. He told me he would take care of the bills, that I'd already had enough stress in my life, and shouldn't have to worry about money or paperwork anymore. He said he wanted to handle it all for me. I didn't argue. I'd never been good with numbers anyway. My mother used to say I had my head in the clouds, that I'd never survive on my own. Charles made it sound like love, like protection. So I said yes. He set up a joint account but kept the statements in his office. He registered the car in his name, saying it was simpler for insurance, and he forwarded the mail to a P.O. box so I wouldn't have to deal with junk letters. At first, it felt like being wrapped in something soft. Safe. I didn't know yet that soft things could also suffocate. Charles left me notes, little folded pieces of paper on the kitchen counter, next to my coffee mug. He'd write things like wishing me a good morning and reminding me about appointments, or saying he'd picked up my prescription and that he loved me. He remembered everything: my favorite tea, the name of my childhood dog, the way I liked my eggs, scrambled, with a little butter, no salt. He'd surprise me with flowers on Wednesdays for no reason. He'd schedule my doctor's appointments because I always forgot. He'd pack my lunch on the mornings I slept in, and I'd find it waiting in the fridge with a smiley face drawn on the container. It was thoughtful. It was kind. And I told myself I was lucky. When my friend Diane came over for tea one afternoon, she looked around the house, at the neat shelves, the framed photos, the vase of fresh lilies, and she said, "God, Margaret, you really have it all, don't you?" I smiled, and I believed her. Because if love looked like this, steady, organized, safe, then I'd finally found it. It was small at first. So small I didn't think it mattered. One evening, a few months into the marriage, I asked Charles about the bank account. Just a casual question. I'd seen an envelope on his desk with our names on it, and I was curious. "Are we saving for anything specific?" I asked, setting a plate of pasta in front of him. He didn't look up, just twirled his fork and smiled. "Don't worry about it, sweetheart. That's my job." "I'm not worried," I said, sitting across from him. "I was just wondering." He reached across the table and squeezed my hand. His thumb traced slow circles over my knuckles. "Margaret, You've spent your whole life worrying. Let me take that off your plate, okay? I've got it under control." His voice was so gentle, so sure, and I felt foolish for asking. I told myself he was being considerate, that he didn't want to burden me, that this was what partnership looked like. Someone strong enough to carry the weight so I didn't have to. But there was something in his smile, something that made me feel like a child being patted on the head. I pushed the thought away, because if I admitted it bothered me, I'd have to admit I didn't trust him. And wasn't trust supposed to be the foundation of love? So I ate my pasta. I smiled back, and I never asked about the account again. Not for years. I'd been working part-time at a bookstore when we got married. Nothing fancy, just restocking shelves, ringing up customers, chatting with regulars. I liked it. It made me feel useful. But 6 months in, Charles started making comments about how tired I looked. He'd watch me kick off my shoes after a shift and ask if it was really worth it, remind me the money wasn't that much anyway. He'd suggest I stay home instead, take care of myself, maybe start that garden I kept talking about. It sounded reasonable. Loving, even. I told him I didn't do it for the money. I did it because I liked being around people, around books. But he kept circling back to it, kept saying I didn't need to work, that he made enough for both of us. And the way he said it, so gentle and concerned, made it hard to argue. So I quit. At first, it felt like freedom. I slept in. I planted tomatoes. I made elaborate dinners and waited for Charles to come home so I could show him what I'd done with my day. But then one evening, I wore a dress I'd bought years ago. Red, with a low back. I thought it looked nice. Charles glanced at me from the couch and said it was bold. A little much. He smiled when he said it, but his eyes stayed flat. He reminded me I wasn't 20 anymore, that I didn't need to try so hard. I went upstairs and changed into something beige. I never wore the red dress again. The phone used to ring a lot. My sister, my old coworker Diane, my college roommate who'd moved to Portland. But somehow, the calls started to feel complicated. Charles would sigh when the phone rang during dinner, or he'd answer it himself and tell whoever was calling that I was resting, even when I wasn't. Once I found a voicemail from my sister that I never got a notification for. When I asked him about it, he said she'd called the day before, that he'd told her I'd call back. He asked if I'd forgotten. I hadn't forgotten. I never got the message. But I didn't say that. I just apologized. He started sorting the mail before I saw it, said he was filtering out the junk. But I noticed birthday cards arriving late, invitations I never knew existed. My sister invited us to Thanksgiving one year. Charles said we couldn't go. His boss needed him that week. I found out later he'd never asked for time off. When I brought it up, he looked hurt, said he thought I'd be relieved, that my family stressed me out, that he was trying to protect me. And I felt guilty. Guilty for questioning him. Guilty for not being grateful. So I stopped answering the phone altogether. It was easier that way. I don't remember when I started doubting my own memory. It happened slowly, like forgetting how to swim. One afternoon, I asked Charles about our tax return. I'd seen a folder labeled with the year on his desk, and I was curious about the refund. He looked at me like I'd said something absurd, told me we'd already talked about it. Last month, asked if I didn't remember. I searched my mind, came up blank. I said I didn't think we had. He sighed, the kind of sigh that made me feel small. Said I'd been forgetting a lot lately, that maybe I should see someone, get my iron levels checked or something. I nodded, felt my cheeks burn. Maybe he was right. Maybe I was forgetting things. It started happening more often. I'd mention wanting to visit my sister, and he'd remind me we'd just talked about it, that I'd said I didn't want to go. I'd ask where a piece of mail went, and he'd say I'd thrown it out myself, that I'd called it junk. I'd suggest going out for dinner, and he'd frown, say I'd told him yesterday I was too tired. And every time I'd search my memory, try to find proof. and come up empty. So I stopped arguing. I stopped asking. Because if I couldn't trust my own mind, how could I trust anything? I told myself I was being dramatic. That's what my mother used to say when I cried as a kid. She'd tell me to stop, that it wasn't that bad. So I started saying it to myself. When Diane called after months of silence and asked why I'd been so distant, I told her I was fine. Just busy, just adjusting to married life. She said Charles seemed a little controlling, said it carefully, like she was testing the words. I laughed, told her he wasn't controlling, just organized. That he was trying to help me, that she didn't understand, she didn't push. But I could hear the doubt in her silence. And when I hung up, I felt angry. At her, at myself. Because if I admitted she was right, I'd have to admit I'd made a mistake. That I'd given up my job, my friends, my freedom, for a man who was slowly erasing me, and I wasn't ready to admit that. Not yet. So I stayed quiet. I folded laundry. I watered the tomatoes. And I told myself that silence was peace, that control was care, that I was lucky to be loved like this, even when the house started to feel like a cage. The money thing started small. Charles had always handled the finances, but somewhere around year 5, it stopped feeling like help and started feeling like permission. I needed a new coat. Mine had a broken zipper and winter was coming. I mentioned it over breakfast one morning, casual, like it was no big deal. He asked how much it would cost. I said maybe $60, $70, something reasonable. He nodded slowly, like he was thinking it over. Then he reminded me we were saving for a new roof, that things were tight, that if I really needed it, we could talk about it later. Later never came. I wore the broken coat all winter. After that, I started asking before I bought anything, even groceries. He wanted a list, every item, every price. He'd go through it with a pen, crossing things off, suggesting cheaper brands, asking if I really needed this or that. I'd stand there in the kitchen, holding the list, feeling like a child asking for lunch money. He'd say it wasn't personal, that we had to be smart, that if I kept spending like this, we'd never be able to retire. But I wasn't spending. I was surviving. And somehow, he made me feel guilty for it. There were moments when I almost said something, almost pushed back, like the time I mentioned wanting to take a ceramics class at the community center. It was cheap, just once a week, something to do with my hands. Charles went quiet, the kind of quiet that filled the whole room. He said he didn't think it was a good idea, that I was already stressed, that adding more to my schedule would just make things worse. He said it gently, but his jaw was tight. I dropped it. But the next day he came home with flowers, a whole bouquet of peonies, my favorite. He'd also picked up takeout from the Italian place I liked, the one we hadn't been to in months. He smiled at me over dinner, asked how my day was, told me I looked beautiful, and I melted. Because this was the man I'd married, the man who noticed, who cared. I forgot about the ceramics class. I forgot about the tension. I forgot that I'd felt small the night before. It became a pattern. Every time I questioned something, every time I felt that flicker of doubt, he'd smooth it over. Flowers, a surprise dinner, a compliment that landed just right. And I'd think, see? He loves me. I'm overthinking it. I started to rely on those moments, to wait for them, to need them, because they were the only proof I had that I still mattered. I stopped recognizing myself. I'd catch my reflection in the bathroom mirror and think, who is that? She looked tired, older. Her shoulders curled forward like she was trying to take up less space. I stopped calling people back, stopped making plans. My sister would text and I'd stare at the message for hours, trying to think of what to say, and then just not respond. It was easier that way. I spent a lot of time in the garden, hours sometimes, pulling weeds that weren't even there, watering plants that didn't need it, sitting on the bench by the tomatoes, watching the sun move across the yard. Charles would come home and ask what I'd done all day, and I'd say, "Oh, this and that." And he'd nod, satisfied, like that was enough. But I couldn't remember what I'd actually done. The days blurred together. I'd forget what month it was, what day. I'd find myself standing in the kitchen, holding a dish towel, with no memory of how I'd gotten there. I thought maybe I was losing my mind. Maybe Charles was right. Maybe I needed to see someone, get my levels checked, take a pill. But I never made the appointment. Because if I went to a doctor, they might ask questions, and I didn't know how to answer them without sounding crazy. So I stayed quiet, and small, and still. One afternoon, I pulled out my old sewing machine. It had been in the closet for years, buried under boxes of Christmas decorations and old photo albums. I dragged it out, set it up in the spare room, and just sat there, looking at it. I used to make things, curtains, throw pillows, a quilt for my sister's baby. I'd been good at it. People used to ask if I sold my work. I thought maybe I could start again, make a few things, sell them online maybe. Nothing big, just something that was mine. I mentioned it to Charles over dinner, tried to sound casual, said I was thinking of picking up sewing again, maybe selling a few pieces on Etsy or something. He laughed. Not meanly, just dismissively. He said nobody bought handmade things anymore, that it was all mass-produced now, cheaper and faster. He asked if I really thought people would pay for pillows I made in the spare room. I said maybe. I didn't know. I just wanted to try. He patted my hand, told me it was sweet that I still had hobbies, but that I shouldn't get my hopes up. I nodded, smiled, said he was probably right, but later that night, I went back to the spare room. Looked at the sewing machine, ran my fingers over the wheel, and I couldn't do it. I couldn't turn it on, couldn't thread the needle, couldn't even sit down, because if I tried and failed, it would prove him right. And if I didn't try at all, I could still pretend I might have succeeded. So I covered the machine with a sheet, closed the door, and left it there to gather dust. Our son came to visit on a Tuesday afternoon. Daniel, 26, working in software development in another state. He looked so much like his father. Same sharp jaw, same deliberate way of moving through a room. But his eyes were softer, kinder. He stayed for lunch. We ate sandwiches on the porch, talked about his job, his apartment, the weather. Normal things, safe things. Then, as he was packing up to leave, he asked where his father kept the tax documents. Said he needed to update some paperwork for his own filing, wanted to use our accountant's contact info. I stood there, dish towel in hand, and realized I didn't know. I didn't know where Charles kept the taxes, or the insurance papers, or the mortgage statements, or the car title. I didn't know anything. Daniel was looking at me, waiting, and I felt my face go hot. My throat tightened. I told him I'd have to check with his father, that I wasn't sure, that Charles handled all that. Daniel didn't say anything, just nodded. But I saw it in his face, the flicker of something. Concern, maybe, or pity. He hugged me goodbye, held on a little longer than usual, told me to call if I needed anything. I said I would, but we both knew I wouldn't. After he left, I stood in the hallway for a long time. The house was so quiet. I could hear the clock ticking in the living room. The hum of the refrigerator, my own breathing. At the end of the hall was Charles's study. The door was closed. It was always closed. I walked toward it slowly, like I was approaching something dangerous. I stopped in front of the door, put my hand on the wood. It was cool under my palm. I whispered, just barely audible, that it was just wood, just a door, nothing more. But I didn't turn the handle. I stood there, hand pressed flat against the surface, feeling my heartbeat in my fingertips. And then I walked away. Because opening that door felt like admitting something I wasn't ready to admit. that I'd spent 30 years locked out of my own life. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to Charles breathe beside me. He slept soundly. He always did. I kept thinking about Daniel's question, about the look on his face, about how small I'd felt, standing there, not knowing the answer. I thought about all the things I didn't know, where our savings were, how much we had, whether we had life insurance. What would happen if Charles died tomorrow? I didn't even know the password to our bank account. I tried to remember when it had started, when I'd handed over the keys to everything, but I couldn't pinpoint a moment. It had been gradual, like falling asleep, and now I was awake. But I didn't know how to move, because if I confronted Charles, he'd be hurt. He'd remind me that he'd been taking care of everything for years, that I'd never complained before, that I'd always trusted him. And he'd be right. I had trusted him. Or maybe I'd just been too tired to fight. I turned over in bed, pulled the blanket up to my chin, closed my eyes and tried to quiet my mind. But all I could hear was a voice, my own voice, but younger, stronger, asking, "When did you stop being a person? When did you become a ghost in your own home?" I didn't have an answer. A week later, the mailman knocked on the door. He had a package that wouldn't fit in the mailbox, something for Charles. I signed for it, set it on the kitchen counter. But as I turned away, I noticed something else. A folder tucked under the package. Plain manila, slightly bent. It must have been stuck to the bottom and come loose. I picked it up. There was no label, just a name written in blue ink on the tab. C. Harrison, Charles's handwriting. I stood there holding it, feeling the weight of it in my hands. I told myself to put it back, to leave it alone, to wait for Charles to come home and deal with it. But I didn't. I opened it. Inside were bank statements, investment records, a life insurance policy, one I'd never seen before, papers with my name on them, documents I'd apparently signed, though I had no memory of signing them. One page caught my eye, a transfer form, moving a large sum from a joint account into one with only Charles's name, dated 3 years ago. I felt something crack inside my chest, not anger, not sadness, something colder, clarity. This wasn't protection, this wasn't love, this was control, and I'd been living in it for 30 years. I put the folder back where I'd found it, set the package on top, made sure everything looked undisturbed. Then I went to the spare room, the one with the sewing machine, and closed the door. I sat on the floor, back against the wall, and let myself feel it. All of it. The shame of not knowing. The anger at him for keeping me in the dark. The anger at myself for letting it happen. The grief of realizing I'd wasted decades being someone's accessory, someone's afterthought. I'd stopped working, stopped seeing friends, stopped having opinions, stopped having a self. And I'd convinced myself it was fine, that it was love, that it was normal. I thought about the red dress, the ceramics class, the phone calls I never returned, the sewing machine under the sheet, all the small deaths that had led to this moment. I sat there until the light outside turned gold, then gray, then dark. And when Charles came home and called my name from the hallway, I stood up, smoothed my skirt, walked out. I made dinner, set the table, asked about his day. But something inside me had shifted. I didn't know what I was going to do yet, but I knew finally that I had to do something, because I couldn't spend the rest of my life behind a door I wasn't allowed to open. I started small, so small that if Charles noticed, he'd think it was nothing. The first thing I did was open a new email account. Not on our shared computer, on my phone, in the bathroom, door locked. A free account with a name he wouldn't recognize. I used my maiden name and a number I pulled out of nowhere. It felt ridiculous, childish even. But it also felt like mine. I used that email to request information from the bank, asked for copies of statements, asked what I'd need to open my own account. They sent back forms, instructions, reassurances that it was simple. I printed nothing. I saved everything in a folder in the cloud, one Charles didn't know existed. Every time I opened that folder, my hands shook. But I kept going. I started keeping cash. Just a little. $5 here, $10 there. Money from the grocery budget that Charles wouldn't notice. I'd buy the cheaper bread, skip the name brand butter, pocket the difference. I hid it in the lining of an old purse in the back of my closet, the one I hadn't used in years. By the end of the first month, I had $73. It wasn't much, but it was something. I also started writing things down. Dates, conversations, the things Charles said that made me feel small, the things I used to dismiss as misunderstandings. I wrote them in a notebook I kept in the bottom of my pajama drawer, under the flannel pants I never wore. And when I read it back, I couldn't deny it anymore. This wasn't love. This was a cage with curtains. One afternoon, while Charles was at work, I went back to the spare room. I pulled the sheet off the sewing machine, wiped the dust away, sat down in the chair and just looked at it. I didn't know if I still remembered how to use it. It had been so long. But I threaded the needle, pulled out a scrap of fabric from an old pillowcase, and I sewed a straight line, then another, and another. It wasn't beautiful, it wasn't useful, but it was something I'd made with my own hands, in my own time, because I wanted to. I sat there for an hour, stitching scraps together into nothing in particular. And when I finally stopped, I realized I was crying. Not sad crying, not angry crying, just release. I started going into that room every day, sewing little things, a pouch, a napkin, a square of patchwork that didn't match anything. I didn't tell Charles. He never asked. I also started responding to my sister's texts. Not long responses, just enough to let her know I was still there. She didn't push, didn't ask questions, just sent me pictures of her garden, her dog, her messy kitchen, normal things. It reminded me that a life outside this house still existed. One night, I pulled out an old box from the top of the closet. Photos from before I got married. Me at 22, standing in front of a lake, arms spread wide, laughing. Me with friends at a concert, hair wild, face flushed. Me holding a pottery mug I'd made in college, crooked and ugly, and mine. I didn't recognize that girl, but I missed her. 3 months after I found the folder, I stood in front of the study door again. It was a Saturday morning. Charles had gone to the hardware store, said he'd be back in an hour. I'd been thinking about this moment for weeks, rehearsing it in my head, imagining what I'd feel when I finally did it. But now that I was here, I just felt tired. Tired of being afraid. Tired of waiting for permission. Tired of living like a guest in my own home. I put my hand on the doorknob. It wasn't locked. It never had been. The lock was in my head. I turned the handle, pushed the door open. The room was ordinary. A desk, a filing cabinet, a bookshelf, papers stacked neatly, a coffee mug with a faded logo. Nothing special, nothing sacred, just a room. I walked in, sat down in Charles's chair, ran my fingers over the surface of the desk. There was a photo in a frame, our wedding day. Me in white, smiling wide. Charles beside me, hand on my shoulder, looking at the camera. I picked it up, studied it. That girl in the photo thought she was starting her life. She didn't know she was ending it. I set the frame down, opened the top drawer, found more files, more statements, more decisions made without me. But I didn't feel angry. I felt calm, because I wasn't sneaking anymore. I wasn't asking permission. I was taking back what had always been mine. I don't know what happens next. I don't know if I'll leave. I don't know if I'll stay and fight. I don't know if Charles will even notice the shift in me, or if he'll keep going like nothing's changed. But I know this. I'm not the same woman I was 3 months ago, or 3 years ago, or 30. I know my own name now. I know what my voice sounds like when I'm not apologizing for taking up space. I know I can sew a straight line, that I can hide money, that I can open a door without asking. And I know that I don't have to have all the answers today. I just have to keep moving, even if it's slow, even if it's small, even if it's just one step at a time, because I've spent long enough standing still. I'm 53 years old. I don't know how much time I have left, but whatever it is, I want it to be mine. Not his, not theirs, not anyone's, but mine. I want to wake up in the morning and decide what I'm going to do with my day. I want to spend money without justifying it. I want to say no without feeling guilty. I want to be a person again, and maybe that's enough. Maybe that's everything. So I'm asking you now, whoever's listening to this, how many doors have you learned not to open? How many questions have you stopped asking because it's easier to stay quiet than to face the answer? I spent 30 years behind a door I was too afraid to touch. 30 years convincing myself that silence was safety, that smallness was love. And I'm telling you this because maybe you're standing in a hallway too. Maybe you've got your hand pressed against the wood, whispering that it's just a door, it's just wood, it doesn't mean anything. But it does, and one day, you're going to have to open it. I don't know when that day will be for you. I don't know what you'll find on the other side. But I know this: you deserve to walk through your own life without asking permission. You deserve to know where your money is, what your passwords are, what your own voice sounds like when you say no. You deserve to take up space. And if this story touched something in you that you haven't spoken about in years, something buried under excuses and justifications and the weight of just getting through the day, then maybe it's time not to have all the answers, just to start asking the questions. Because the quietest prison is the one you build yourself. And the door was never locked. You just forgot you had the key. If this story resonated with you, take a moment before you go. Leave a like, share it with someone who might need to hear it, and subscribe for more stories that remind you you're not alone. Sometimes, opening the door starts with listening.